Oh my gosh, I'm back with another car video already. Unbelievable. See, I'm taking inspired action. This this video is about inspired action, and that's what I'm doing right now. I feel inspired to share this with you. So yesterday, the video was about the role of action, and Neville talks a lot about how you don't have to do anything. Once you've done your imaginary scene in your mind. And what I was saying yesterday, and I think the way that you can intelligently interpret it, or the way most people intelligently interpret it, is that it's not that you're literally doing nothing. It's not that you're going to stay in your room and do nothing and the thing's just going to show up. It's that you're going to take the inspired action necessary for the thing to show up. And that means going out into the world and living your freaking life. Inspired action as opposed to forced action. Like in Relax More, Try Less, I'm talking about that when you relax, it's not necessarily just lying on the couch and taking a nap and taking it easy. Relaxed is more about being in the flow a lot of the time, and having a relaxed inward feeling as you go about your day. This is what I've talked about with people since I got into this stuff. And even though it's obvious, it's not as obvious as it needs to be, I guess, because it really trips people up and they just assume they do an imaginary scene and then they just stay holed up in their room or their cave and do nothing, and they expect this external thing to come to them. And that's just not how it works in reality for virtually anybody. Instead of taking forced action that feels bad, you take inspired action that feels good. There's a huge difference there. I think when people talk about flow, being in flow, this is kind of what they're talking about. Inspired action, compels you to the right result, to your desire. So I thought I would read something from Joseph Murphy today, which directly relates to all this and will hopefully help clarify this a little bit more for everybody. This is actually from his book, How to Attract Money, which is another masterpiece of his. This chapter is Your Right to Be Rich. And this excerpt is very straightforward. I think you're going to see why I'm reading it to you in relation to what we're talking about. So Murphy writes, oftentimes the question is asked, what should I do after meditating on the end and accepting my desire in consciousness? The answer is simple. You will be compelled to do whatever is necessary for the unfoldment of your ideal. The law of the subconscious is compulsion. The law of life is action and reaction. What we do is the automatic response to our inner movements of the mind, inner feeling, and conviction. That's huge, okay? That paragraph explains, a lot of New Thought, law of attraction theory in a couple sentences. I'm going to read it again. You will be compelled to do whatever is necessary for the unfoldment of your ideal. The law of the subconscious is compulsion. The law of life is action and reaction. What we do is the automatic response to our inner movements of the mind, inner feeling, and conviction. Okay? That means you're not going to be staying in your freaking room. You're going to be doing stuff. You're going to automatically react based on your newfound consciousness of possessing your desire. Murphy goes on to write, to give an example, a very good example of like how this can work if you take it to, the extremes that both Neville and Murphy talk about, where you're doing a, deeply immersed visualization, feeling it as real night after night. This is something, as we've talked about a lot, that works better for some than for others. But if you are doing sats or, a prayer where you're really feeling as if it's happening, if you really feel that, I just want to make it clear before I read this excerpt, this example from Murphy. If you're doing that stuff, that is action too. That is action. Okay? Like assuming a state relaxingly is still action. You're still doing something. Even that is action, okay? And it leads to a reaction. Everything is action. There's no, literally speaking, you can't do nothing. It's impossible to do nothing. So this is the example that Murphy gives here. He says, a few months ago, as I went to sleep, I imagined I was reading one of my most popular books, Magic of Faith, in French. I began to realize and imagine this book going into all French-speaking nations. For several weeks, I did this every night, falling asleep with the imaginary French edition of Magic of Faith in my hands. All right, so even with doing nothing, Murphy's still doing this night after night. So this is still action. Even though it's very limited, very short action, it's still action he's doing night after night. He goes on to say, just before Christmas in 1954, I received a letter from a leading publisher in Paris, France, enclosing a contract drawn up, asking me to sign it, giving him permission to publish and promote abroad to all French-speaking countries the French edition of Magic of Faith. So in other words, he manifested this. He manifested the French edition of Magic of Faith by doing this simple action before bed. That's about as limited as it gets. That's doing nothing, okay? But even then, my point is he's doing something. And usually, as we were talking about yesterday, you're going to be doing a lot more outward action than just this. But this is an extreme. But it's just to show you that he's still doing something. Murphy goes on to write, you might ask me, what did I do about the publishing of this book after prayer? I would have to say nothing. The subjective wisdom took over and brought it to pass in its own way, which was a far better way than any method I could consciously desire. So this is doing this correctly, the way that Neville and Murphy often talk about. But again, what I'm saying is even though he did quote unquote nothing, he still prayed vividly every night and it worked. And quite frankly, for most of you, just praying and doing nothing else for something you really desire is probably going to be tough. You're going to want to take the outward actions that feel inspired to make it happen. If you really don't want to do that, and you just want to do what Murphy and Neville are talking about, you're welcome to do that. But you're going to want to take inspired action. If your inspired action is just to pray night after night, that's okay. But understand that for most of you, it's probably going to come to you faster what you want if you take other inspired action. Okay? Murphy goes on to write. Sorry, I have to turn the page here. This is a book with a ton of bookmarks in it. Here we go. Murphy goes on to write. All of our external movements, motions, and actions follow the inner movements of the mind. Inner action precedes all outer action. Whatever steps you take physically or what you seem to do objectively will all be a part of a pattern which you are compelled to fulfill. So, whether we're taking very little action, like Murphy just described, by just praying every night vividly before going to bed, or whether we're taking massive action, the key is doing it in an inspired way where it feels right. Whatever steps you take physically, Murphy wrote, or what you seem to do objectively, will all be part of a pattern which you were compelled to fulfill. That's compulsion. The action you take is a compulsion based on your thinking, on your imagination, according to a lot of these New Thought guys and Law of Attraction guys. And again, it's fine if you don't believe that. I know that most people listening to this do believe that, and I just want to make it clear that you're always taking action, whether it's a little bit of action or a lot of action. And what we want to try to do is make our action inspired and not just sit on our butt waiting for the thing to come, because that's not taking inspired action. I hope that this was helpful. Basically, it should be clear. And if it's not clear, feel free to email me and I can try to clarify it for you a little bit more.